Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the second half of the GEFA Water 101 webinars for this year. The numbers are climbing with participants, but we will go ahead and get started today on time. This webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to access this webinar as well as past webinars on GEFA's website. And we will share that link in the chat for you all, just in case there's someone who could not participate and needs to come back and watch it. So you will find that in the chat later on today. But for today's webinar, we will be focused on the needs survey. We have two speakers. Our first speaker is Amanda Carroll. Amanda is a senior project manager with the Water Resources Division for the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority. In this role, Amanda works with communities to provide low-interest financing for water and sewer infrastructure projects. She handles projects from start to finish, and this includes the intake and review of applications from potential borrowers, loan development, construction inspection, technical assistance to the borrower during construction. And she is also responsible for the administration of the Federal Capitalization Grant Award each year from the EPA. Our second speaker is Ms. Monique Ladidadi. And Ms. Monique has over 20 years of experience with the planning, permitting, design, and construction of water, wastewater, and stormwater projects. Her responsibility includes evaluating, designing, and permitting existing and proposed water and wastewater treatment facilities, interacting with local, state, and federal regulatory officials on regulatory and permitting issues such as potable water and wastewater treatment and disposable systems, water quality monitoring programs, industrial and construction stormwater permits, as well as wastewater industrial NIPDES permits. So both speakers will be going into detail about both needs surveys, both the clean water and drinking water. So we are going to pass the ball over to Amanda as we get started. As a reminder, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you do not see it, just slide your cursor and you'll see it pop up. You'll use the Q&A to ask questions. So as things pop up, go ahead and drop it in the Q&A and we'll make sure to get those answered for you all. Amanda.
Thank you, Alana. I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for being here to talk about the needs survey in the GEFA Water 101 series, part 2, session 1. Next slide, please. So first, we're going to start out with a poll. Did you attend or have you watched any of our previous GEFA 101 webinars?
Alrighty, and we're just going to keep this poll up just for one more moment here, just so people can submit their responses. It's simply yes or no. Have you attended or watched any of the previous GEFA Water 101 webinars? Right, and we will close the poll. All right, about 34% have said yes, but 66% have said no, Amanda.
Okay, so we have on our GEFA website, there's a link to go watch the previous ones, and then also a link to watch them on our YouTube channel as well. So we'll drop that in the chat for y'all to go take a look at. It was anything from the environmental review process to federal requirements to the emerging contaminants and lead service lines. Okay, our next poll question is, do you know if your system participated in the Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs Survey or the Clean Watershed Needs Survey? Yes, no, or not sure.
All right, same as the first poll. Everyone should see this poll up on their screens. Your options are yes, no, and I'm not sure. We'll just give you one more moment to answer and select the options on your screen. And we'll close the poll. Great, so about 73%, well over half, aren't sure if they participated.
Okay. All right. Next slide, we're going to talk about today's objectives. I'd like to give a GEFA overview. It kind of is going to go into a little bit of background on GEFA and a background on our programs before we get into the need survey requirements. And then I'm going to hand it over to Monique for her to discuss the Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs Survey and Assessment, or DWINSA, and the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey, or CWNS. And then I'll take it back over to kind of talk about and wrap things up with the updated FY23 allotments and the survey results. So you can kind of see, what's participating in the surveys and how it assists Georgia in getting some additional funds through our capitalization grants each year from EPA. Next slide, please. So we'll just go through the GEFA overview. So who is eligible to borrow from GEFA? Local governments and instrumentalities of the state, municipal corporations, county or local water, sewer, or sanitary districts, state or local authorities, as well as NGOs, as long as their primary purpose is to permanently protect or conserve lands. And then next, we're going to go into our funding programs here at GEFA. We do have state funds and federal funds. The state fund is Georgia Fund. I'm not going to go into too much detail there. You can see on the slide kind of what it covers in our borrowing limit. I'm going to talk more about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, or CWSRF or DWSRF. We're the government. We really like acronyms and try to use them as much as possible, just to kind of throw people off a little bit. And so the reason I want to go into these specifically is because DWINSA was based on, projects eligible through the DWSRF, and the CWNS was specifically through projects eligible under the CWSRF. And so the federal funds, the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, both have a borrowing limit of $25 million per year. Through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, it can fund sewer projects, stormwater projects, solar, and we can also do land conservation through this program. Through the Drinking Water SRF, these are projects related to water and solar, but the sole purpose has to be for public health benefit, and DWSRF projects cannot be for economic development. So we can't run a water line down the road, into an industrial park in hopes that a company or business will come. It has to be an existing company or business for us to run that, that water line. Both of these are federal programs, as I said, and therefore they do have the federal requirements, which is the Davis-Bacon Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, the American Iron and Steel, and BABA, as well as the Environmental Review Process, or CERP. And there again, all of those federal requirements were mentioned in a previous GEFA one-on-one and went into a lot more detail there. So if you want to know any more about those, if you come to us for an SRF loan, please go to the website and look at those. They're about an hour-long video. All right, next slide, please. So the needs survey overview, the DWINSA is through the Safe Drinking Water Act, requires EPA to conduct a survey and assessment every 4 years. We were a little bit late this year for it because of COVID, but that's what they try to like to stick to, is every 4 years. This is used to determine the financial needs of the nation's drinking water infrastructure over the next 20 years. And it guides EPA's distribution of annual funding to states through the DWSRF and through these capitalization grants that the states are given each year from EPA. The The Clean Water Needs Survey is a comprehensive assessment of the capital costs to meet water quality goals of the Clean Water Act and address water quality related public health concerns. And Congress requires EPA to conduct these under the Clean Water Act. And they're again conducted typically every 4 years, although it's been 6 or plus years, I believe, since we've had our last one. And the information collected by this survey is used strictly to generate a report to Congress quantifying the nation's total wastewater infrastructure needs, but not for compliance or regulatory purposes. The CWNS report to Congress is currently used as part of the allotment formula for the sewer overflow and stormwater reuse municipal grants programs. And it'll be used as material to consider when reallocated the state revolving loan fund federal matches between the states. And the reason we have the lovely Monique here to kind of talk about the need survey is because WSP, or would at the time, but WSP assisted GEFA in collecting the data for both the DWINSA and the Clean Water Needs Survey that was just concluded in April 2023. So with that, I believe, I will be turning it over to Monique to go into DWINSA and CWNS, and then I will take us on home to kind of talk about the results from those surveys.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everyone for joining. Alana, do you mind moving over to the next slide? Thank you. So as Amanda indicated, WSP, or Wood at the time, conducted the DWINSA study in 2021, 2022. It was supposed to conclude in 2021, but due to COVID, it was extended 1 more year. It usually runs every 4 years, and this one was just a little bit delayed. DWINSA estimates the 20-year national infrastructure needs for states and territories. And so we conducted the one for Georgia. And DWINSA, it's interesting because unlike the CWNS, it takes a small sample of Georgia water systems into consideration. In this case, this past DWINSA was 54. They usually run between 50 and 64 systems that need to be surveyed. And included in that allotment is all large systems. And in this case, they define large systems, those 3 systems serving over 100,000 people or customers. And medium systems are those that are between 3,000 and 100,000. So DWINSA always surveys large systems because it's challenging for EPA to model need for large systems. They're so unique. But for medium systems, they take a smaller sample, a subset of all medium systems, and then they extrapolate it to the statewide need. And then the EPA consultant called CATMUS, they directly survey small systems. And small systems are those, for example, that serve hospitals, jails, and small transient communities. So they directly survey small systems. So we participated in this last round of DWINSA, 54 systems, all large systems in Georgia, and a small subset of medium systems. And the categories that are considered on the right side of your screen, they include source water. So where do you get your source? Is it a groundwater well? Is it a surface water system? Treatment, what kind of treatment system do you have? Is it conventional? You have, tertiary treatment or some specialty treatment? Storage, how many storage tanks do you have? Are they ground? Are they elevated? Their size? Pumping systems, you have repumping stations. How many pumps do you have? Transmission lines, diameter, length, backflow prevention devices, are they yours? Do you pay for them, or are they the homeowner's responsibility? Hydrants, valves, meters, etc. So we need to have an allocation for each of these systems. So that's why during the interview process, we asked, how many tanks do you have? How old are they? What's their size? Are they elevated? Are they ground? Because EPA assumes that they need to be refurbished at least once between that 20-year infrastructure need that is encompassed within the survey. And they assume that you're going to upgrade your system or replace your system components at least once. And they're going to assume that at least you're going to replace or expand 10% of your transmission line. So if you have these minimum needs for each system, if you really want to target the allotment that Georgia gets, you need to prove via documentation that your need is greater than. So if you have any documentation, for example, in your capital improvement plan, meeting minutes, anything that exists prior to a specific date that is described by the DWINSA regulations or guidelines. And new to this DWINSA, that was not in the 2017 DWINSA, lead service lines. And we're going to talk about a little bit about that later. This past DWINSA wanted information on lead service lines, operation workforce concerns, and pipe and storage tank construction material issues. Next slide, please. So the methodology, how did this survey come about? We reached out to the different systems that were part of the survey process, and those were dictated by EPA. They were not hand selected by Georgia. The EPA sets forth which systems are part of the DWINSA and therefore need to be surveyed. Each system was sent a copy of a spreadsheet, and it's an EPA generated spreadsheet, so that they have a copy of it, they could look at it. And then we reached out to the systems and said, we're going to fill it out for you. Please look at this survey so that you can have an idea of what information you need to have on hand and which people should probably be present during the interview because they're the most knowledgeable about the system. And something I need to point out that EPA has very strict documentation needs, not just for DWINSA, but for the CWNS as well. So if you indicated that you had a need, but you had no documentation prior to us having that conversation, it's not in a CAP, meeting minutes, anything that existed prior to that call, unfortunately, we couldn't include it in the survey. And then, so we provided that documentation directly, actually to EPD. EPD would review it to make sure it was accurate, and then it would be forwarded to EPA. And so on the right side of the screen, this is a printout from the EPA, directly from the EPA DWINSA website for the state of Georgia. And anybody can go to the website and look for Georgia or any other state. And you could see by far the transmission and distribution needs far exceed most needs, even treatment. And it's not surprising, but it is surprising for Georgia. I expected that for Florida and Texas, but every time it comes around, it doesn't quite impress me for Georgia, but it far exceeds all other needs, followed by treatment, storage, and source. And moving on, next slide, please. And now we're going to take some time to talk about the Clean Watershed Needs Survey, or CWNS. And CWNS, just like DWINSA, also estimates the 20-year national infrastructure need for states and territories. And this one, of course, is specific to Georgia. And unlike DWINSA, that has that small set of samples, the 2021, 2022 DWINSA had 54 systems, CWNS inventories all systems. And now that's, if you take into consideration large, medium, small, transient, non-community, all those small systems, and it's not just wastewater, it's land application systems, it's decentralized systems, and non-point source, stormwater. If you take that into consideration, it's a huge undertaking to survey each system. And it's almost an impossibility. We don't have the time or manpower, and it would probably be impossibly expensive as well. So we tried to target systems that would get Georgia the biggest bang for the buck, right? So large systems, medium systems. And we were also able to cover all decentralized systems, as there's a Georgia website that has an inventory of decentralized systems per county. So we didn't have to contact the health department for this. Thankfully, this information was readily available online. And what EPA allowed us to do is that we developed a state-specific approach for decentralized systems. We also did it to a certain extent for stormwater systems, but we did it for all decentralized systems, where we were able to extrapolate the number to take into account the number of decentralized systems per county, population served, size, capacity, and then extrapolate it to the whole state. And EPA approved it and applied it to the state of Georgia. So you take into consideration the scale of CWNS, which is quite large compared to DWINSA. It's a huge undertaking, and we tried our best to contact as many systems as we could, but we were also bound by, I guess, responsiveness. That is also always a challenge when we survey systems. I know systems are very busy. They have a lot of needs of their own and challenges of their own. Turnover, new regulations, all of these I know hinder the ability to be responsive to these surveys. But I hope, one of my hopes from this presentation is that you take home an understanding of why it's important to respond to these two surveys, because it really does have an effect on the allotment of grants for the state of Georgia. Following on the methodology for CWNS. So we contacted as many systems as we could. We tried to take an account of this, of what they have in their system, connectivity to other systems, treatment capacity, future needs, etc. And tried to get as much documentation as we could. Now, unlike DWINSA, that assumed that a percentage of your system or that would be upgraded or replaced within the 20-year life of the survey, CWNS did not operate that way. There was no minimum threshold. If you don't have documentation, then they would assume there was no need. So documentation was particularly crucial for CWNS. EPA did have this allowance for systems with less than 10,000 people. That was what's called a small community form. And you just fill out the form and then you would have an engineer vet it. In this case, if you didn't have an engineer of record, I would serve as that engineer. I would review it and sign and seal it on your behalf. Next survey, please. Next slide. And then this is just a kind of a summary of the results of this past CWNS. So we contacted over 600 systems, wastewater, land application, decentralized, MS4s, you name it. We received documentation and project costs for over 300 systems, and over 15,000 unique projects were entered into the EPA database. And once approved, hopefully those infrastructure needs will be applied to the overall needs of the state of Georgia. As of today, EPA is still sending us questions on some of the documentation that was submitted. So it's technically not final. And so therefore, the final report to Congress has not been submitted as of yet. So it's not currently available. Hopefully it will be available first quarter 2024. And on the far right side of the screen, you'll see what categories. It's just a little bit of an informative slide. What categories of needs CWNS was interested in. So secondary treatment, advanced treatment, conveyance systems, new conveyance systems, CSOs, stormwater, non-point source control, water reuse, and of course, decentralized systems. So any and all of those would be applicable for CWNS. And I think that's my last slide. Next slide. Oh, no, findings. One more slide. And so this slide is not available as of yet on the website. We had to generate it based on the responses that we had received to date from the different systems. So this is a draft. Do not consider it final. This is our estimated need for the state of Georgia. And what are some of my thoughts? First thing I want to point out is that Georgia has a significant amount of undocumented stormwater needs, not just stormwater, but non-point source. And I think that's just because we haven't, as a state, had a need yet to document non-point source control and stormwater needs. And also, non-point source is really hard to pinpoint because it's everybody's responsibility. For example, there are TMDLs for receiving water bodies, and then the TMDL loads for different systems, but it's easier to target a point than a non-point. And so it's difficult to have someone take responsibility for non-point source needs. So therefore it's a challenge to document it. So it's my understanding and my belief that Georgia has a significant amount of undocumented stormwater needs. And therefore, I don't believe that this CWNS is an accurate account of the state of Georgia for stormwater and non-point source. Just because the documentation is not there, and it's a limitation that CWNS has. My hope is that EPA for the next round will allow some sort of alternate documentation or some sort of extrapolation of need for different systems. Municipalities have seen an increased need in advanced wastewater treatment due to changing permit conditions, and I would venture to say new regulations. There are, I think everybody here at least would have heard of PFAS and other emerging contaminants and the EPA roadmap. So new regulations are coming up, new needs, and so there will be a need for advanced wastewater treatment due to changing permit conditions in the future. And I think it will seriously be reflected in the next CWNS, not so much in this one. Federal grant programs and GEFA funding are significant sources for communities. I didn't know that. That's a new bit of information that was interesting to me. WSP captured grant application needs totaling greater than $8.5 billion for the state. And then the last point that I wanted to make was that systems should prioritize developing at least a 5-year capital plan for their system. I think it's just a good programmatic effort that should be undertaken by each system. It could be a very, very simple plan. You can develop internally. You don't need an engineer or a consultant to develop it for you, but at least a 5-year capital plan is helpful if you don't have one. And I think I'm certain that's my last slide. So I'm gonna send it back to Amanda.
Thank you, Monique. And just to piggyback a little bit off that last slide, when she mentioned about having a capital improvement plan, EPA does have some funds for technical assistance, and that potentially could be something asset management planning or some sort of capital improvement plan that they may be able to help with that. I think they're trying to hit smaller systems for now. But if you'd like to know more about that, please feel free to send me an email. Okay, sorry, didn't mean to go back. Pushing forward. So I want to get into kind of the results from these surveys and show you our updated FY23 allotments that we're getting for the CAP grant. So you can just see how significant it is once we have, the updated needs and the difference between the FY22 and the FY23 allotments. But the first, just want to go into DWINSA results, go into a little bit more detail on that. It's the 20-year National Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs Survey for the 7th DWINSA is $625 billion. And this is a 32% increase over the 6th DWINSA. And as Monique alluded to, the 8th DWINSA will probably be significantly higher as well due to emerging contaminants, PFAS, or any other thing that might come down the horizon. So you can see Exhibit 1, the total estimated need for the different size systems. Your small, less than 3,000, the medium from 3,000 to 100,000, the large greater than 100,000. And then you can see down in the pie chart, just kind of the total need by infrastructure project category: treatment, storage, source, other, and distribution, transmission. And this is the overall across the nation. But in the table on the left for table 5, Monique put this table together for us, or the folks at WSP put this together for us. We're very appreciative for their help in this. The 2017 costs as compared to the 2022 costs for source, treatment, storage, transmission, as well as other needs. And it's a pretty significant increase, but there again, I don't feel it's all really captured yet, and it'll be definitely more significant for the next DWINSA in 4 or 5 years that comes out. Next slide, please. So here's really the meat of really what I want y'all to take home from this. So just kind of a background on this. We get something called a capitalization grant from EPA every single year. And that's signified here by the word base. So the drinking water base and the CW base capitalization grant. Through bill, we had 5 new programs, supplemental, the emerging contaminants, and the lead service line replacement. And if you can see here in FY22 for the drinking water, because that's through that survey, they have already updated the allotments from 22 to 23. You see a very significant change on base and supplemental. It's pretty drastic on supplemental, going from $42.4 million to $57 million. In the history since I have been here managing the programs, which has been about 9 years, the drinking water has never been more than the clean water. So hopefully with this new Clean Water Needs Survey, it'll kind of catch up with the drinking water supplemental and base. The drinking water emerging contaminants went from 17.8 to $20.7 million. But if you see there, the drinking water lead service line replacement, our FY22 allotment went from $66.8 million to $28.6 million. And the biggest reason here is when we were doing the DWINSA, 2-3 years ago, no one was doing the inventory then. No one had lead service lines, wasn't even on the radar for them. So when WSP reached out to them to ask for information on lead service line replacements, no one had any information. So it looked like Georgia didn't have that need. But there were many states across the nation that showed the same thing. They went from a pretty high amount in 22 down to the 28.65 for 23. So what EPA has allowed us to do is reach back out to those systems who responded the first time for the lead service line inventory and re-inventory them and get a clearer picture to hopefully modify the allotment for FY24. So we're hoping that will kick that 28.65 back up, because we have seen through this last pre-application period for the lead service lines, there is a significant need in Georgia. And if I'm not mistaken, the amount of systems that actually submitted for their pre-application for lead service lines was pretty low. So we know there's a much greater need in Georgia than what was just submitted. Next slide, please. And here on this slide, I just mentioned the EPA headquarters announced that there'll be an opportunity for those public water systems that answer the lead service lines questions in 2021 to submit their information again. Here are the ones listed that actually responded previously, and we will be contacting them to get some better information. So we'll reach out to y'all and let you know, hey, WSP will be contacting you to get some information on the lead service line replacements. You know, what's it going to cost for your inventory? What's it going to cost to replace the lines? And get familiar with what is eligible for that, because there's a lot of things that are eligible through this lead service line replacement program that you might not think can be paid for. So please give it some thought. Please submit some really good numbers for us. And we can send a document that shows what different types of projects are available. The biggest thing is communication. Any sort of communication, flyers you need to get together, websites, things like that, we would help pay for just to get the inventories and the information out to folks. The potholing for the inventory. There's a whole list. I don't have those slides in here, but if you go back to the GEFA one-on-one session, and I think it's the one right before this, I could be mistaken, Lisa Golphin did the lead service line replacement webinar along with Manny Patel, and she went into a lot of detail on exactly what we can fund through this program. So please, put it all in there so that we can make sure to get the needs and get the funding that's needed for the state of Georgia.
And
So I'll get
Amanda,
off my.
Amanda,
Sorry.
before we leave this slide, there's a lot of information on it. A couple of things, clarifying questions that folks are wondering about is if your community, your utility's name is not on this slide, so people are searching through and looking for their name. If they're not on the slide, is there still an opportunity for them to submit lead service line information?
So there is opportunity for funding, and there's opportunity for the next round of the request for interest. But specifically for this survey, we can only contact people that were contacted previously. That was a stipulation from EPA. I see Monique's off mute. She might have a little bit more to put with that.
That is correct. So as I indicated earlier, DWINSA only samples a smaller subset of the larger total of Georgia. So all large systems serving over 100,000 and a small subset of medium systems. So if your name is not on the screen, you did not have to participate in the DWINSA survey. If you have a wastewater side to your business, then yes, you would have participated in the CWNS, but not the DWINSA.
Great, thanks for that clarification, because I know people are like, frantically looking through the list and wondering what they should be doing next. But also just a heads up, and Alana will talk about this at the end too, we do have another webinar coming up on lead service lines specifically, just because there's so much action in that area. That might be next week if I'm not mistaken, but yeah, you'll hear more details on lead service lines coming up soon on another webinar. Thanks, y'all.
All right, next slide, please. And Lisa would kill me if I didn't plug the inventory. Are you prepared to meet the EPA deadline on October 16th, 2024 for the inventory? And Lisa will go into more detail in that next webinar on what it is GEFA is doing. GEFA with the help of EPD with helping systems with the data for the inventory. But I just figured I'd put a shameless plug in there for it, just to make sure it's still, right here on the forefront of people's minds. All right, next slide, please. So my final slide here is just another reiteration of the Clean Water Needs Survey results. The last one was conducted in 2012, and the current estimated needs in the state of Georgia for CWNS specific categories is around $23.4 billion. And this is an 863% increase in collected costs since the previous CWNS. And so if it's that extravagant, there's no telling what it's going to be in the next 4 years. But as you can see here, it went from 2.7 billion. Sorry. The words are, it's small on my screen, 2.7 billion to 23.4 billion. And as stated before, the stormwater management, there's definitely a lot more needs within the state. So here again, I just want to reiterate, and I'm sure Monique, would love to chime in as well. It really does help when you respond to the survey. And we understand it's a lot. And we understand it's a lot on your system. You have turnover and, people are hitting you left and right. You just did the drinking water. Now you're doing clean water. We had to do emergency response plans. Now what else do you want? But it really does help the state and help us get some, the bigger piece of that pie that's allotted for us every single year. As you could see with that previous allotment table where we went from 42 million to 57 million just in the drinking water supplemental category. So then hopefully, with our lead service lines, we'll be able to get that number back up for 2024. Just can't wait to see where we're at with the next one. And that's all I had. Thank you. We appreciate y'all's time today.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda and Monique, for sharing such valuable information. Here you will see Amanda and Monique's contact information if you had follow-up questions that, may pop in your head later on, but make sure if you have something that's pressing or you're curious about, drop those in the Q&A right now. We are going to slide on into the question and answer section portion of this webinar here. Excuse me. So to kick things off, we did have a question for you ladies. How do you think we can begin to document Georgia's stormwater if EPA can't necessarily make provisions?
I think there are various, I'll make an attempt to answer that. There are various layers to that question. For example, if you are within an area that has a stormwater utility, then they would operate like a water or wastewater utility where they have documentation for need. They'll probably have a capital improvement plan and other paperwork that summarizes need. If you are not, my hope and my interest is one of the comments I submitted to EPA is that they take into consideration some sort of extrapolation method for need. Shoreline, impervious area, anything that I can use mathematically, say we have this much impervious area, we have this many impaired streams, and then maybe do a joint non-point source stormwater need allocation for that county, city, even small section of stream, because documenting non-point source needs and stormwater needs is going to be a challenge. And then projects that would address these needs could be taken from TMDL response documents. For example, shoring up the shoreline, moving pasture elsewhere, putting a fence here, trying to make sure cows don't cross directly over water, but over a bridge. Like there's so many little different projects that you could allocate to address in a contamination issue in a receiving water body. Then you can address stormwater non-point source concerns that way if we don't have documentation for it. Because I think it's rather unfair for a state that doesn't have the documentation other states do for that particular media, that if they don't have documentation, it doesn't have need, that's an incorrect assumption or correlation. So my hope is that EPA will take some sort of alternate engineering methodology to document need. That's my hope.
Thank you. Now, I know that we've been trying to drive home the emphasis and the importance of taking these, both of these surveys. But is there anything else on top of that these utilities can do to demonstrate the need of the state of Georgia? Any best practices that they can be, applying to make sure they're answering correctly, the most up-to-date things of that nature?
Well, I think Monique kind of mentioned it a little bit with an asset management plan or your capital improvement plan, and kind of making sure it's updated every year, every couple years, so that when the survey does come out, you're able to just send it on, and we're able to document them, because the surveys aren't going to stop. They're going to, every 4 to 5 years. So I think for us, at least on our end, and I'm sure Monique can chime in as well, but I think that asset management plan or that capital improvement plan updated would be something that's very helpful.
Yeah, and EPA does not allow documentation older than a certain number of years to be submitted. So if it's aged out, even though the need is still there, then it's not allowed to be submitted. So yeah, just keeping it updated, making sure it's accurate and up to date. And honestly, just answering our call, answering our emails, it helps. It really does.
Awesome. So is the survey solely submitted via email and WSP reaching out directly to the utilities, or is it accessible online for utilities to proactively, go in and begin filling it out?
So I'll answer each one independently. So both DWINSA and CWNS have a state coordinator. In this case, Amanda was the state coordinator for those. And so ultimately it's under her purview and her responsibility. She asked us to assist GEFA in gathering the information and submitting it to EPA. So for DWINSA, the EPA generated a spreadsheet that had different tabs, and the different tabs correlated to the different needs. So storage, treatment, so on and so forth. So it's a pre-described Excel spreadsheet that needed to be filled out. If the system wanted to fill it out themselves, way to go, perfect. But there's a specific training both for DWINSA and CWS that needs to be taken in order for you to know how to fill it out. So what we aim to do was help the system fill out the survey. So that's what the interview process was. So it's like, let me know this, let me know that, because we took the training to understand what the codes mean, what the allocations mean, what's allowable, what's not allowable. So hopefully we made it easier for systems to complete the survey instead of doing it themselves. For CWNS, the EPA created an entry portal, so an online version of the DWINSA spreadsheet. And that one was very complicated. So I think systems would probably opt for us to have to do it for us, for us to do it for them. I promise. And so again, our hope was that when we schedule an interview with you to get information about your system, to get documentation, or if there are any follow-up emails, we're actually simplifying the process instead of making it more complicated. That's at least the hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So for the surveys, once they have been completed, I know one of the slides showed the list of municipalities and utilities that took for DWINSA when we were discussing the lead service line, but for CWNS, is there a list of utilities that have actually completed the survey? Whenever it is completed, is that posted online for people to see and people to follow up on? No.
So EPA holds that confidential. And so we can't see for example, I have access to only the state of Georgia.
Right.
I can't see other states at all. And that's only because I have special access to get that, to see that information. So if any system wants to know if their city, county, individual system participated in either DWINSA or CWNS, they can certainly reach out to me and I will respond. But no, you cannot see individual systems needs or allocations or anything like that. It's confidential information.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. So looks like that was our last question that was posted. Again, if anyone else has additional questions, please go ahead and drop those in the Q&A. But I did want to thank both Amanda and Monique for taking the time today to share such good information with you all, just so that we all have a better understanding of the importance of both need surveys.
Thank
I
you.
did want to touch on the upcoming GEFA Water 101 webinars that are coming up next week and the following Tuesday. All three webinars that we are hosting for part 2 this year are going to be on Tuesdays, same time, almost same place. It will be on Zoom. You'll just have a different link, right? So from 2 to 3 next Tuesday, we are having an updated Georgia Lead Service Line Inventory webinar. So Manny Patel from EPD and Lisa Golfin from GEFA will be back to provide additional updates. They did let us know that new things were rolling out as far as the database goes this summer. So we'll hopefully have more relevant and updated information to share with you all. So that is the point of coming back. But also we can reiterate those points that Amanda was making if you did not catch that first webinar earlier this year. So make sure you guys register for that. The third webinar, which will be the final GEFA Water 101 this year, will be discussing principal forgiveness in the Georgia SRFs. So again, both webinars, registration is open. We have made sure that emails have been going out. So if you are on GEFA's listserv, on IB Environmental's listserv, you would have received emails, but another reminder email will go out tomorrow for registration. So just make sure you guys, make sure you lock it in, register, so that way you can log in and get this valuable information. We also have been posting it on social media. So if you are looking for the links, they are readily available all over the place. But on that, in the chat, when Stacy shared how you can access the recorded webinars, that link will also lead you to registering for the upcoming webinars. So just to reiterate that for you all. And Amanda just dropped in the chat for everyone the link to the lead service line replacement intended use plan. That has been posted on GEFA's website. So make sure you have that link so that way you can go on and fill that intended use plan out. But are there any closing remarks, Amanda or Monique?
No, I just want to thank everyone for attending the webinar, and GEFA definitely wants to thank WSP. They've been a great partner for us for this. Both of the need surveys been very instrumental in assisting us with it.
Well, thank you everyone for participating, and thanks Amanda for co-presenting with me.
Yeah, and we got a couple, I think we have a couple other last minute questions that came in. So Tammy was asking, will we receive the information for this link? She might be asking about these webinar links. I'm gonna try to, Lana might be faster than me, but I'm gonna try to post these 2 links in the Q&A box, Alana, as an answer. Oh, she said the link was forwarded to her. So we are on it. So Tammy got the link. And then, there was a comment about the importance of this by one of the listeners. But basically, we want as much money. We all want as much money to come to Georgia through these programs as possible. And it is a competition. So just to kind of reframe some of what Amanda and Monique were both saying, more money can come to the state of Georgia if we have more comprehensive responses to these 2 need surveys. And that means that at your local government, you have to be doing asset management, you have to be doing capital improvement planning, which are all good practices anyway. They're best management, best management practices, a good way to run your utility or your local government. So that feeds into this, and there's an allocation, and different states get different slices of the pizza pie, if you will. And just want to encourage everyone to jump on board, be another voice to say, help more money come to the state of Georgia, right? You saw some of the numbers. Your responses make a difference. So, look out for those next time and do respond. All right, and Alana's dropped those chats in. I just don't see anything else yet. Tammy was taken care of. So I think we've answered all the questions. And Alana, I'll let you close us out.
All right, so I just dropped in the registration link for the lead service line webinar that again is next Tuesday, and then following is the principal forgiveness webinar that will be June 20th. Both webinars are from 2 to 3 p.m. But you can click both links to go ahead and register. So thank you all for joining us. We appreciate your time, and make sure you register so we can see you next week. Have a good afternoon.